So welcome, a warm welcome to all of you, especially a really warm welcome to those of you who are tuning in from freezing cold Alberta, Canada right now. And all of those in BC, we still love you. We are so much looking forward to this evening, our very first event in this Queer Virtue series. So if you're joining us tonight, you get to see sort of our first iteration of our time exploring the book Queer Virtue. And tonight we have with us Reverend EDMAN, the author of Queer Virtue, among many other accomplishments that she has made in her life. And we'll be hearing from her a summary of the book, and we'll have a chance for you to ask questions and have conversation after that as well. So we want you to know that whether you're here with us just for tonight, or you're going to be part of the whole series with us, or maybe you're going to join the series because you're so excited about it after tonight, you are so welcome here. And I want to let you know sort of how this came to be. So if you're joining us and you're not familiar with the United Church of Canada, that's totally okay. We have sort of regions that spell out a certain geography. And there's two regions, the Pacific Mountain region, which is most of British Columbia, and the Chinook Winds region, which is central and southern Alberta. And basically, they're going through a process for the region, an affirming process. And some of you might know what that means. It's an intentional journey of reflection, education, and storytelling to say, who do we want to be? How can we be people of faith who are inclusive? And how do we live that out? And what does that look like, not only how we live every day and on Sunday mornings, but also in our policies, in the way that we operate? How will people know that this is who we are? And so both of these regions are going through that process. And I think I said my name's Pam Rocker. I'm sorry if I didn't. You can see it in my box. And I'm lucky enough to get to work alongside both of these regions to explore what that means for a region to become affirming. So this is sort of our first joint venture to bring this series to life. And we are so excited to be able to have this time of reflection during this sacred time of year to offer an invitation to all of you to reflect on what isn't often reflected on. And that's sort of some of the perspectives that Liz brings up in her book. So I would love to just have, there's lots of people here who are on both the Pacific Mountain and Chinook Wind region teams. And so if you want to sort of wave, if your camera is on, so that people know that you are with us, that we are not alone. And these are the folks who are doing so much really passionate, thoughtful, intentional work to invite folks into what it might mean to be affirming. So they're really fantastic. So you can sort of see those folks. And if you have any specific questions for them, you can also contact Chris, you can see Chris's box there. He's the host of the meeting along with myself. Hi, Chris. And we'll be happy to take any reflections or suggestions from you as well. I would love to just introduce you to the chair of Chinook Winds region, Reverend Tracy Robertson, and she is going to do our land acknowledgement for us this evening.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see so many wonderful faces as I'm scrolling through every screen that I have here, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this and to lead you this morning, like just this morning. See, I'm like still into Sunday mornings. And so we acknowledge that we are the first people that are here on our territories. And so the United Church of Canada acknowledges that its buildings and ministries from coast to coast to coast are on traditional territories of Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries and affirm our commitment to the principles and actions of reconciliation. And so this is something that's so important to all of us, and many of us start our worship services this way, our meetings this way. And so I just invite you to put your own territories, where you're at in Canada, into the chat, so we can have a chance to see where everybody's from.
Thanks so much, Tracy. So yeah, I would invite you to do that. That's a really sort of grounding place for us to begin our time together. So thank you, Tracy, for that. I want to let you know that we are recording this evening. So if for whatever reason you wish your face to remain anonymous, you can turn off your camera. That's no problem. The great news about that is that Reverend Edmund allowed us to do this so that we're able to share this recording with folks who aren't able to make it. So we know that lots of people wanted to come and we all have really busy schedules. So we're able to offer that, and we'll be able to let you know how to access that afterwards. I am so excited to introduce Liz. We've gotten to chat in the past couple of months, and I feel like I've known Liz for a long time, and we could probably just talk about anything. And we're bonding over teenage sons and all kinds of things. And I wanted to let you know a little bit about who she is, if this is your first time being introduced to her. So Reverend Edmund is an Episcopal priest and a political strategist who's been igniting people's understanding of Christianity and queer life for more than 25 years. She's lived and worked on the front lines of some of the most salient contemporary issues where religion meets sexuality, serving as an inner city hospital chaplain to people with HIV and AIDS from 1989 to 1995, helping craft political and communication strategies for marriage equality efforts, and persevering for almost 2 decades to become an openly queer priest in the Episcopal Church. She also created, and some of you I know about this, she partnered with Parody in 2017 to create Glitter and Ash Wednesday, a project to increase the visibility of progressive, queer positive Christians and to explore Christian liturgy through a queer lens. Her work has been featured in almost every major news outlet that you can think of. And I wanted to read, and don't get too embarrassed by this, Liz, but United Church people, it seems, are very big fans and deservedly so of Richard Rohr. And so when I found this quote from Richard Rohr on your website endorsing your book, and it's a really beautiful quote, I was like, I have to read it. So this is what I let Richard say, a really beautiful thing so that I can look really smart to introduce Liz. So he says, Liz is an openly queer priest in the Episcopal Church, and she focuses in her book, Queer Virtue, on authentic Christianity as a spiritual journey that prioritizes the ancient Christian impulse to rupture simplistic binaries, especially those pertaining to the relationship between self and other. Edmund's book doesn't focus on issues of sexual morality, but on all the cultural and religious boundaries Jesus transgressed. With all the changing ways of understanding gender and sexuality, most of us truly need contemplative eyes and the guide of the Holy Spirit to rupture simplistic binaries and be compassionate and respectful of difference and diversity. I am so excited to introduce you to Reverend Liz Edmund. So over to you, Liz.
Unmute. Pam, bless your heart. Thank you. What a beautiful introduction. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, that was I didn't know that Richard Rohr was going to do that piece, and what how meaningful. I am so delighted to be with you all this evening. And my one regret right now is that I can't sort of be scrolling and seeing all the screens at once, because I just wish I could see you all the time, all the time. But Pam, I just want to thank you for the invitation to be here. Chris, thanks for all the work you're doing behind the scenes to make this happen, and Tracy and Lee, and special thanks to Trina Duncan for your leadership in these 2 regions and helping and supporting this program. I'm thrilled to death to be here. And I want to say in a very heartfelt way that it was Pam who first said to me, you know, you've got this great study guide, but it's not really suitable for online groups. And so it was Pam who had the idea to adapt the study guide for online use. And I hope it works for you, because y'all will be the first ones using it. And if it doesn't, please let me know. But I hope that it does. And thank you. That's already a gift to me, to have me sort of thinking in a new way about how that can work. What I want to do this evening is give you sort of I think of it like sort of a Queer Virtue 101 talk. And this is a talk that's got two parts. So first, I want to just sort of lay out, when I talk about queerness, or when I use the word queer, like I want to lay out a little bit what I mean by that. And then I want to talk a little bit about where I see that in the Christian tradition. And then I want to talk a little bit about why I think this conversation matters right now in this moment in history. Y'all are doing something important by taking this journey together. So I want to talk a little bit about what that might mean. And then we'll have some conversation, all of us, and I look forward to hearing what you're making of all this. So let's dive in. One of the queerest stories that I know begins not in a fabulous city, not on a glittering dance floor. It begins in a nameless backwater town. Actually, this story starts in a barn. A young woman is traveling with her husband-to-be. She is very pregnant, and were it not for the generosity of her fiance, who is not this child's father, she would face a perilous future as an unwed mother. A lot of people are on this same road, and the inn where they try to get a room is booked up, or so the innkeeper says. Maybe he just takes one look at this woman, knows she's about to go into labor, and he doesn't want to deal with the fleshy, wet mess that her body is about to churn out. Maybe he doesn't want to hear her groans, her cries of pain. But the guy has a heart. Gesturing with his thumb, he offers, "You can stay the night in the barn out back." She gives birth that night in a stall, surrounded by donkeys and sheep, and her afterbirth will land in hay, easily swept up in the morning along with whatever the animals have not so delicately excreted in the middle of the night. You know this story. We all know this story. This is how the Christian narrative begins. Christians proudly proclaim that this baby, this bloody, illegitimate bundle of quivering flesh, is God incarnate. It never ceases to amaze me that this tradition will warp into a movement famous for demonizing bodies and their desires. We Christians openly preach that the power of God infused a human form while violating the most basic sexual conventions of the day. The essential premise of the faith is that somewhere in this extraordinary mix of flesh and spirit and scandal lurks the promise of ultimate spiritual health for the human race. I am a queer priest. What draws me into this faith tradition is precisely this story, this God who doesn't hesitate to enter into a body just like mine, just like yours, rupturing everything we might tend to believe about how bodies and souls relate to each other. What draws me into this faith tradition is precisely the fact that I am queer, that I have lived my life among people who understand that yes, we are carnal beings, and yes, we are called to make transcendent beauty visible to the world. So I have to tell you, it bewilders me whenever somebody cites religious belief to justify treating LGBTQ people like crap. Seriously, I find it viscerally confusing. But even more than that, it breaks my heart. Queerphobic religion is the biggest drag on our movement toward justice, and wow, does it take a toll on queer souls. Let me tell you another story, and this is a story that you may know firsthand. A young person, probably a teenager, goes looking for a spiritual community. This person finds an evangelical Christian group and joins it, feeling a sense of welcome and of home that rivals anything they've ever experienced. Then this person comes out as queer, and finds themselves being spiritually disemboweled by the same community that once promised unconditional love. This is a painfully common narrative in queer life stories. The spiritual bait and switch is not just sad, it does immense damage. In one fell swoop, it erodes a young person's ability to trust themselves, their community, and God. In some queer people, it breeds despair that is literally suicidal. And there's not a question in my mind that the theology behind this bait and switch is rooted in blasphemy. Well, in recent decades, many progressive denominations have made strides towards celebrating the lives and ministries of LGBTQ people. The fact that we're here tonight is a hopeful sign and a symbol of that movement, which is good. I mean it. You're doing something important being here tonight. At the same time, what those of us on the religious left have seldom done is explain to the world why, theologically, this is right for us to do. This theological silence creates the appearance to some people of theological dissonance. It leads to way too many kind-hearted, well-intentioned Pride Sunday sermons that are tepid and weak, and worst of all, boring. I tell you, the church would not be in decline if over the past 40 years we had more consistently preached a gospel that is exciting, robust, and that speaks truthfully to people's real lives. My work is an attempt to address all of this. I am convinced that a theology that is good for the queers will be good for the church. So I refer to this theology as queer virtue, and it has two basic premises. First, that queer people possess virtue according to terms that Christianity itself sets. And second, that Christian communities could learn a lot from queer people about how to live our faith, how to be the church more effectively and with greater consequence. So, queer virtue draws on the academic discipline of queer theory. And you may know that in queer theory, the word queer becomes a verb. To queer is to rupture false binaries, or put another way, queer theory works to disrupt Black and white thinking. Particularly, LGBTQ people constantly rupture or queer the idea that male and female are two distinct categories. Queer people may be androgynous in our dress. Our marriages often do not include one man and one woman. Intersex people tell us plainly there's no such thing as a simple biological binary, and growing numbers of transgender people reject any neat conception of themselves as male or female at all. By rupturing the false binary of male and female, queer theory establishes conceptual space for LGBTQ people to inhabit. This queer approach to binaries has helped me to think in a new way about Christian faith. What I see in Christianity is a relentless disruption of false binaries. For example, was Jesus human or was he divine? Well, we Christians say he was both. After the resurrection, was Jesus alive or had he died? We say both. And when Jesus touched people who were ritually unclean in order to heal them, were his actions sacred or were they profane? Well, both. You know, Jesus was a master storyteller. One of his most famous parables is the story of the Good Samaritan. A lawyer asks Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Jesus responds by asking the lawyer to imagine that he's traveling down a road and is robbed and beaten nearly to death. Two of his colleagues see him and cross the road to avoid having to deal with his crisis. Third man comes by, a man that the lawyer would have identified as his inferior and worse, as a moral degenerate. You know the story. It's the third guy, the degenerate, who helps him. So Jesus turns the question back around to the lawyer. You tell me who your neighbor is. Jesus challenges this lawyer to disrupt his understanding of who he is, who the Samaritan is, and how God demands that they relate to each other. One of the biggest binaries that Jesus challenges his followers, us, to rupture is the one between self and other. Jesus repeatedly demands that we upend simplistic notions of who I am in relation to you, or to that person over there who is despised, or the wrong sex, or sick, or ritually unclean. Jesus got this movement going, but it was Paul who worked his butt off to create communities that would follow Jesus. Paul was the chief architect of the theology and ethical path that would guide these churches. In his letter to the Galatians, Paul continues this business of disrupting the binary of self and other. He writes, "There's no longer Jew or Greek. There's no longer slave or free. There is no longer male and female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus." These were the biggest binaries of Paul's day, and he ruptured every one of them. These rupturings, these queerings, are not peripheral to Christianity. Both theologically and ethically, they are at the very heart of the Christian movement, which is why I argue that authentic Christianity is and must be queer. It's clear to me that the church could learn a lot about its mission and purpose by looking to queer experience. To understand what I mean by this, let's take a moment to consider what queer life entails. Queer experience often, not always, but very often, looks something like this. You have to discern an identity that affects how you perceive yourself in the world, how you relate to other people, and how you will navigate your most intimate relationships. You have to get honest with yourself about that identity and tell the truth about it to others, even when doing so puts you at risk. You have to touch others, by which I mean you have to connect with others who have discerned a similar identity. This is a touch that can be physical or spiritual or both. You have to build community together, creating what is essentially an adopted family. And then queer people have a strong track record of looking to the margins to see who is still struggling and doing something about that. This is the path of queer virtue. Now, it's important to note that these steps are not in a fixed order. They are not once and done. These demands interact with each other, exacting more precise demands all the time. A queer person lives these steps over and over again. I call this a path of virtue because, in the Aristotelian sense, this is something that people get better at the more that we have to do it. But none of us walks it perfectly, and some queer folk flat out refuse to walk parts of it at all. Still, again and again, it impresses me how dedicated my community is overall to this path, and how hard we work to stay on it and to make it accessible to others. What I have long observed as a priest is that this path bears a freakish resemblance to the ethical path that Christians are supposed to follow. Christians also have to discern an identity. For us, this is an identity as people created by God who depend on God for our very being. We're supposed to tell others about that identity. That's what evangelism should be. We're supposed to engage with others, build community together, look to the margins to see who is still struggling and do something about that. It's no accident that these two paths are so resonant. Once you understand the extent to which Christianity is about disrupting false binaries, about queering, it makes perfect sense that queer and authentic Christian ethics are so similar. What is perhaps noteworthy is that what this priest knows about Christian virtue, about Christianity as an ethical path, I have learned primarily from walking this queer path every day of my life. Okay. So, why does this matter? As I've pondered the relationship between queerness and Christianity, this is one of the most significant things that I've learned. The importance and the effectiveness of both of these paths, queer and Christian, are rooted in their relationship to scandal. Let me say that again. The importance and the effectiveness of both of these paths, queer and Christian, are rooted in their relationship to scandal. I want to talk about this for a moment because Christians hardly ever talk about our relationship to scandal, except when some church leader has been engulfed in it. And queers began inching away from scandal years ago when we trained our communal energy on marriage equality and other signs of societal acceptance. But the simple truth is that both queerness and Christianity are deeply scandalous, and this scandalousness is a vital part of both movements' power. It's relatively easy to see the scandal in queer experience. Our identities and relationships, our overt carnality and open embrace of sexuality, these are all scandalous, an affront to many people still, especially people who consider themselves to be respectable members of society. Of course, a great many people who consider themselves to be respectable members of society identify as Christian. But my friends, Christianity was never meant to be a respectable religion. Jesus entered into scandal every chance he could, starting 9 months before that moment in the barn that we just discussed. Conceived out of wedlock, his entire life on earth was a deep dive into experiences that offended the arbiters of social and religious propriety of his day. It was a scandal. Whenever Jesus touched someone who was considered ritually unclean, a key part of his healing ministries. He scandalized people every time he defended adulterers or allowed women to touch him or called people on the margins of society by name and told them how much God values them. The epicenter of Christian scandal is the cross. Crucifixion was deployed by Rome to keep people in line. It was a public spectacle designed to cast a bright spotlight of shame on its victims. Christian faith centers on the claim that Jesus was crucified, that he really died on that cross, and that he was resurrected, that he really came back from the dead. The whole point of this narrative is to shake up conventional notions about life and death, but also specifically to disrupt conventional notions about how power works. Jesus was mocked and strung up to die in a hideous manner. When he is resurrected, he doesn't just beat death. He also beats every violent, coercive strategy that is designed to strip human beings of our dignity. These power dynamics are the reason that this conversation matters so much right now. A healthy dose of disruptive, binary rupturing proclamation would be good, not just for the queers and not just for the church, but also for the world in which we live. Now, I don't know how any of y'all identify politically or theologically, but just for a moment, indulge me here because I want to speak just for a moment directly to those of you who identify as Christian and lean to the left. Those of us on the Christian left are absolutely right to stand up to anti-immigrant fervor, to protest virulent racism in whatever form it takes in our respective countries. Jesus was crystal clear about basic issues like respecting the dignity of folks on the margins. But my friends, it is not enough for us to stammer biblical passages about loving your neighbor, putting them into play like pinballs. It is unsatisfying when the Christian right does this. It is equally unsatisfying when it comes from the left. Prophetic witness demands more of us. The human race right now desperately needs to make meaning in this complex and globalized world. In the midst of division and fear and a global pandemic, we need to know how to move forward with health. If the Christian left is to offer anything of value, we must do two things first. We must cultivate a theological framework to guide our vision. We need lenses that help us to make sense both of the theological tradition that we've inherited and the world in which we now live. Second, we must model that theology. The most important way we can do that is by owning the scandal that we are and being the scandalous people that God created us to be. For me, queerness has become both a theological lens and a modus operandi. It is simple without being simplistic. And I find the clarity it provides to be consistently refreshing, whether I'm thinking about theology or politics or trying to navigate interpersonal dynamics, including the dynamics of what goes on inside a church. Queer experience offers daily lessons in how to do the most essential work of Christian ethics. Queer people know what it is to discern an identity and find a healthy kind of pride in it. Queer people know how to come out, witnessing to our identities and to our dignity. Coming out could be an extraordinary model for Christian evangelism, telling the good news not by threatening people with damnation, but by witnessing to something that is actually good. Christians could learn a lot from queer people about how to foster power dynamics that allow all of us to be our full, authentic selves, facilitating healthier relationships and breeding stronger, more vibrant communities. Finally, queer experience could help Christians comprehend what it means to enter willingly into scandal and why it matters so much to do so. Many Christians take seriously our call to stand with people on the margins of society, and I bet there are people throughout this entire call who work every day to do that. What we often fail to appreciate is that this kind of outreach, these kinds of ministries, are shot through with scandal. Christian hospitality isn't about being nice to people. It's about helping people perceive their God-given dignity by upending systems that do violence to people's bodies and souls. This kind of disruption scandalizes, and if it doesn't, it isn't doing an important part of its job. This kind of disruption is queerness incarnate. It is at the heart of what Jesus was trying to get his followers to comprehend, to be, to do. Many queer people understand these dynamics viscerally. We Christians could regain enormous credibility simply by opening our eyes to see the virtue that queer people model every day. But we Christians could gain so much more if we could truly value the gift that queerness is, celebrate it, and determine to learn from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I wish we had a clapping sound effect, but I think you can see some of the icons that are showing up with the little hand clapping emoticon. Thank you so much. I feel like I wrote about like 10 highlights from this, and I feel like I've read your book, I've read all of this, but I still have so much that really, really speaks to me. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So folks, I invite you to, if you have some questions, you can put some questions into the chat. I have a few that I have in mind that I can start off with, but I know that Liz is really interested in what you're curious about, what your experience might be in this. So feel free to not be shy. If you feel like it's more comfortable for you to do a private message, then you can private message either Chris or I, and we're happy to not name names, but to bring your question up. So if that makes it easier for you in your context, we're more than happy to do that. I will check the chat really quick. I think one of the things that really struck me, Liz, is you talked about that sometimes even in, sort of progressive, queer friendly churches, the theological silence, leads to theological dissonance. And I think for me, I think that's interesting, and many of us might have experienced some really great inclusive preaching that is still very radical and rare when we compare it to the rest of the context of religious dialogue and religious landscape. But often I feel like church leaders may feel more shy to go into theologically why, not just why all the verses that we don't believe in, that, gay people and queer people aren't allowed, but what are the things that we talk about when we talk about this is why we celebrate this way of being, right? So I'm curious to know more from you about why do you think that is still such an area that we struggle to have that theological sense of, to talk about the affirmation and this is why we believe what we believe and back that up theologically.
Yeah. I honestly think that that the reason it's taking us a while, I also want to say that I am seeing some movement on this. I'm beginning to hear better and better proclamation. So I do think that we're growing. And I think one of the reasons that it's taken us a while is just because it's taken us a while. I mean, and that's not just it's not just about queerness, although to me that's the tip of the iceberg. That's kind of the thing you can see right in our world today. But as you've had so much of Christianity, like taking this hard shift to my right, your left is my right, right this way, but this hard shift to the right. And in the United States, of course, that's meant like this just intense relationship between far right-wing Christianity and the Republican Party. What I think that's caught a lot of more left-leaning or even centrist Christians kind of off guard. The idea that we have to be more articulate about the theology undergirding what we believe, I think it's just taken us by surprise in a way. And in that way, we are really gifted, I think, to have come, to be now arriving in the wake of essentially 50 years of liberation movements to finally, I think, begin to be able to speak. So that's one piece of it. And the other reason that I think that we are getting some traction right now is the awakening that is happening in this moment right now, about pervasive racism, about white folks like me, like really finally kind of getting what the experience has been for Black people, for Indigenous people, for over a course of centuries, and developing language for that. It happens that I think queerness as a theological lens can help us continue to articulate a powerful gospel message with greater and greater vitality and strength. So, I'm hoping that there's sort of a moment that's arrived.
Yeah, me too. And you're right. I do see that movement even more, and I hope that it continues beyond the present moment. We have a question from Justin, and Justin says, "Thanks so much, Liz. You mentioned that as Christians, we would do well to model coming out in a model akin to queer folks as a way of embracing our theological identity. I'm curious to know how we might do this and whether we might be risking appropriation or diminishing the deep and honest struggles of queer folks."
Thanks, Justin. That's a really good question. It's an important question. And I will tell you that not every queer faith leader that I talk to agrees that this is a good model. So you're onto something important. I think that it can be. And I think that it can be for the same reason that I think queerness in general can help Christians is kind of open our eyes to see kind of what we're doing. There's a British priest, James Allison, who talks about like realizing, oh, that's what I'm involved in. And coming out is just one of those moments where I think we can use this concept to see, oh, that's what it's about, by paying close attention to what coming out is for folks who are queer. For example, when a queer person comes out to somebody else, in general, we're not doing that to change the other person. We're doing that because there's this really important part of our lives, and if this other person is important at all, then it matters that person understand, who you are. And I think evangelism much more should be like that. And I will tell you that in communities that I've been part of where there's been growth, it's very often because somebody has been out in the world basically witnessing to, I'm in this community and it's giving me something really valuable. And they're not saying to the person, you must come. And they're certainly not threatening the person. They're just saying, there's this beautiful thing I'm part of. One of the ways in general that, that one avoids misappropriation, and I'm so glad you raised that because you're right about that. One of the ways you do that is by giving credit, Like, I think you can talk about, I'm going to come out to you as Christian, and that's this queer model, right? But I'm going to try this thing, and that's what I think. I mean, that's an idea, but try that.
Thanks, Liz. We have another question here from Louise, and she says, or they say, part of my issue has to do with the language used. What does it mean to give successful reintroductions? How about doing something without concern about being successful? Help me. Faithful disruptor, interesting term. This work has nothing to do with popular, it is about the work. So I'm wondering if the question is sort of, how do we blend these two different things together? The faithfulness and the disruptor part of it.
I want to understand what Louise is saying here. So is the idea, are we still talking about coming out? Is that sort of the idea?
I think it's just, I will actually just ask Louise, if you're here and you want to unmute, it might be better coming from you.
Because I really love what you're saying about success is not I really love that. That is absolutely 1000% true. And I'm so glad that you said that.
I am here.
Hi.
Hello.
Yes, hi. I
Hi.
can hear you. Thank you. Yeah.
Nice to hear you.
Nice to hear you too.
I wrestle with the niceness
Mm,
of my friends, my colleagues, it, it, um, and what seems to me to be um, a fearfulness,
mm,
an unwillingness, or a kind of perhaps uh, disabling of their own power,
mm.
it, because we want to be nice.
Yes.
We want
Yes.
people to like us, and this work is not about being liked.
Thank you.
It is about the work. And if I could just get people to have people understand that you stand on the shoulders of people who come before you. People, not everyone is going to like you, and it doesn't matter to me if you live in a small town or you live in a large city. Be willing to be seen, be willing to be heard. And if you're not going to do that, get out of the way
Mm,
of those who are doing the work, who
mm,
are willing to do the work, and to do it with love and compassion and caring and all kinds of tenderness and understanding. However, I've been doing this, for God's sake, for 66 years.
yeah.
And the language is still the same, and I'm kind of weary of it.
I'm with you on that, and I'm really, really grateful to you for raising the point. You know, particularly because you've just used other words that are so much more powerful and so much more important. You know, not being nice, but love, which is, you know, people often use love, particularly in Christian context, in this kind of squishy way. But love is not a squishy concept.
No.
It's hard. You know,
is.
it's hard. And in exactly the way that you just described, it demands compassion, it demands tenderness, it demands honesty, you know, and a commitment to do a certain amount of work in community and beyond community. And I mean, you know, just the work within community of trying to be authentic with each other is powerful, risky work that takes enormous strength and intestinal fortitude.
It does.
You know, right?
It does.
And I think that's crucial. There's a chapter in Queer Virtue on authenticity, which is, to me, that's where I try to talk more about the power dynamics, because it's one of the greatest failings, I think, in so many Christian churches right now, the reluctance to pay attention to power dynamics within our community, because those power dynamics often continue to harm, victimize all kinds of people who aren't necessarily part of the power broker structure. And that's very often, that's the queer people, that's the people of color, that's the, you know, it's the women, it's the children, it's the, I mean, you know, so I just think you're right. And as you're talking about the work, the other concept that I want to just lift up is joy, because you can't do the work without finding the joy, right? And taking it seriously is how you cultivate joy in it and cultivate the connections between us.
Precisely. But one other thing.
Yes.
That being willing to stand is only the beginning. It's the beginning of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And often when we feel that we've spoken, we've been marginalized, we've been victimized in whatever way that might have occurred, then the conversation stops. That's when the conversation needs to continue.
Amen.
And we are
Amen.
as a culture, we are unaccustomed to disagreeing and and being able to dialogue through our disagreement until we discover, oh, we're saying the same thing, except our language is different, or our understanding is different, or our life experience is different. And I want to encourage and challenge us to begin to do the work. This is a wonderful event, and I thank you so much for it. And this has to be the beginning of the conversation.
Yep, that's right. I feel really strongly that that faith communities at their best should be the place where we get to practice doing things like resolving conflict. You know, and
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like, so speaking now from the US, we you know, with the just bitter partisan divide that we've got going right now, we need more than ever to work those muscles, to learn how to talk across disagreement and even dislike.
Yep.
You know, it does, and because you know, sometimes it happens that in fact we're not saying the same thing. We got to work that out.
Yeah.
You know, that's one of the reasons that I think this conversation is so important. You're right; it's a starting point, and we gotta get going with this. You know.
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Louise, for that.
You're
I got
welcome.
a message, and someone who's a graduating student from seminary this spring says that they can't tell you how important this discussion is to have in seminary. My colleagues from other faith traditions are missing out on a class in queer theology to guide their praxis. They seek me out, but that is not my role. I don't want to be the poster person. Yeah. So not really a question, but just sharing, you know, that this is a really important discussion to have in seminary. I often see courses like this being optional or considered sort of niche, right? And not necessarily prioritized to folks who are, you know, in those stages of exploring and discerning what their ministry could be.
It's why I like to, you know, I like, it's why I'm so enamored of the idea of queerness as a theological lens. Because if you start talking about it as theology, then it becomes something we can be studying together. You know, we could be studying this together. This could be embedded in biblical theology, you know, in exegesis and scriptural scholarship. And I mean, there's just so many ways that it could come to play. And it shouldn't, you know, we don't need to rely on queer people to teach these things. This is stuff we can talk about. Don't hesitate though to send them to me if you need to, because I'll talk to you.
That's good. We need to take turns on this. We have another question, and Marie is saying, I have a concern that aligning with queerness may be promoting more tribalism, which goes against the God of inclusion who draws us all into a great circle of compassion, ontologically transforming us through extravagant tenderness.
I'm gonna kind of, thank you for that. I'm gonna kind of reiterate what I was trying to say a minute ago, which is that that's exactly why I think it is valuable to think about queerness as this sort of movement of the spirit that's not just about the sexual identities of a certain group of human beings. Really, the premise of queer virtue is that different people, and I mean all of us, we walk around with different identities, different, you know, corporate experiences. You know, Pam and I will have things in common, that experiences that others of you haven't. Some of you will have things in common that I've never experienced before, right? Or identities that aren't part of my identity. And I really believe that those experiences, those corporate identities, teach you something about who God is. you know? And my work is in queerness. This is what I think queerness can teach us, because those things that you know about God, because of the identities that you carry around, the experiences that you've had, the traumas that you've survived, the joys that have changed your life, those experiences teach you something about God. And it's not something that's only true for you, for God. It's something that's probably true about God. And so I'm really interested in more conversation where we all bring our particularities to bear, not so that we can kind of move into separate corners and discuss them with, only the people who have had these experiences. Sometimes you need that, and I respect it. Sometimes you need that, right? But ultimately, the idea is to have the conversation, like to come together and in the way that I think Louise is suggesting, in order to learn from each other. Where are the things we can't see because we haven't experienced that?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and thank you for that question. Mm-hmm. I'm getting there's a really great question that I got in a message, and it's sort of pointing out that much of our community doesn't think much of the church because we've been hurt, and they see the church as hypocritical and judgmental. So in terms of this, I guess a large group question perhaps, and you can talk about this too, but how do we stand as a queer Christian in the queer community and hold space for reconciliation or a counter narrative that love and invites? Knowing that we're in and among communities where most people have been hurt, they don't see the church as a safe, welcoming space. And so how do we stand in that space as queer Christians and hold space for that reconciliation?
You're asking me, right?
Yeah, I mean, first, I guess.
I wonder what the person means about reconciliation. Like, are we talking allowing other queer people to be reconciled to the church, or allowing the church to reconcile? I'm just kind of curious what that means.
So
go ahead.
So how I'm reading it, and there's an invitation if the person wants to share more, but if not, that's okay too. How I'm reading it is sort of, we have an understanding that the church has hurt queer folks, and us probably experiencing that too. And so how do we, if we identify as queer Christians, create a space for, I think that they also mentioned a counter narrative to what sort of the destructive narrative usually is about exclusion. So how do we do that when we're part of the institutions that are considered to be judgmental and hypocritical?
So I'm going to side a little bit with the seminarian on this one. I don't really think it's queer people's job to plead the case of the church. I think it's the church's job to demonstrate that we value and respect the dignity of every human being.
That's a great answer. I would have had a much longer one, but that's perfect. And the question is coming from somebody who's actually leading our first evening in the Queer Virtue series, the study guide, who is Lauren. And so Lauren, I wonder, is there anything that you wanted to elaborate on or share about the question that you had?
Sure, beautifully done, thank you. Hi, Liz. Thanks for your talk earlier. It's fabulous.
Hi, Lauren. It's good to meet you.
Thank you. Back at you. So I've been quite active in the queer community over many years. And I know a lot of people have some real opinions in our community about the church and what Christians in their mind and in their experience stand for. And to be queer and Christian sometimes feels like a wilderness experience, if you will. Like you're holding space between two camps who don't really talk or get along.
100%. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep.
So how do we stand in our own queer community
Yeah.
and sort of try and be the voice of love, obviously as one of them, but also they know the face of something that to them is hurtful and offensive, and they just don't see how you can manage both.
Yep. Yep.
Does that explain it better?
It explains it really, really well. Thank you.
Thank
you for that. And I feel you on this. And I'm not sure I have a simple question. There is no question that that one's witness itself matters. One of the things that I think is really desperately needed and truly important is the ability to give queer people space to name their own spiritual lives, their own spiritual desires, with zero pressure to come to a church or even, to be honest, zero expectation that they're going to find those desires satisfied in a church. Because they might, but they might not, right? But in the meantime, what we can do, and honestly, we can all do this, this is part of what I mean about coming out. One of the things that we can be doing is learning how to talk about our faith and making it visible in a way that gives other people room to talk about what they believe or don't believe, their experience. That's a lot of what I mean when I liken sort of coming out. There's the queer people have this beautiful way of sort of, you kind of make it clear who you are. And one of the real beautiful things about that is that when you make it clear who you are, you give somebody else the opportunity to make it clear who they are. And that, in a way that's not threatening, in a way that hopefully is freeing, and maybe you can create a little bit of a bond around that, that's liberation right there. And I think we could be doing far more of that with faith, with spirituality,
Thank you. And thank you, Lauren, for that question. I'm really looking forward to Lauren leading our first study session. So I'll be promoting that a little bit later, so you can watch for that. Here's another question that we have, and it says, every ministry candidate will go out to have queer conversations on some level in their faith community. How do we support ministers in all faith communities with queering models that they can embrace without fear?
Can I see this question?
I'll paste it into the chat.
Okay, do it. Yeah, do that. Do that again.
Okay, it's not letting me.
No, okay, read it. Just read it again. Read it again.
I'll say it again. It's giving me a boom sound. Zoom isn't clear enough, I guess.
Privacy concern.
It says every ministry candidate will go out to have queer conversations on some level in their faith community. How do we support?
I need to know what that means. This is one of the things I'm sort of hung up on. I'm not quite sure what that means exactly.
Mm-hmm. No, I invite the person to elaborate more if they want to, or if you want to remain anonymous, you can just send me another sort of clarifying explanation. How I'm reading it, Liz, is that every minister is going to have conversations of some sort. So whether you're just doing a Pride Sunday, or maybe you're going to address the topics theologically, but on some level, that's not going to be easy. no matter how sort of progressive your church may be. But then there are some churches that are extremely complicated to have some of these discussions.
Yeah.
So I think how I'm reading the question is, how can we support ministers in all faith communities, which includes ones where it is more of a complex thing, with queering models that they can embrace without fear?
Well, this is one of the reasons that I think it is helpful to take this word queer in the academic sense as a verb, that's just this disruptive force, and use queer to talk about that force and to be able to talk about it within Christianity. You know, I have actually had some success talking with even really conservative Christian ministers, and I want to that I know success is not the point, and I really love that idea, but I'm just going to say success in the sense of actually like getting someone to sort of like think, wait, that's not what I thought. Wait a minute, what are you talking about? Like really sort of pay closer attention, right? By using this word queer. For instance, you know, there are, you know, any Christian who is well versed in Paul, for instance, you know, that's somebody who takes their faith seriously, you know, and that's the kind of thing that I think oftentimes progressive Christians, we're not always the best at being able to articulate, you know, what Paul's argument in the letter to the Romans is necessarily, but Paul just disrupts these false binaries all over the place. And if you can talk about Paul and attach this concept of queerness to what he's arguing, I have had really conservative pastors say to me, oh, that's what you're talking about. You know, like, so I've got this premise that authentic Christianity is and must be queer, right? And then somewhere in the book, it also says it's a next step to say, therefore, authentic Christian community is and must be queer. And I had a super conservative pastor who's like completely freaked out by this idea. And he's like, I don't know what you mean. And we started to talk about Paul, you know, and because that's all that Paul does is talk about how can we have Christian community that is characterized by loving relationships, hard love, you know, where people take seriously our relationships with each other, our obligations to each other, right? So to lift up, for instance, that letter from the Galatians, neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free, no longer male or female, you know, and to be able to say, that's queerness in what he's saying. I watched this guy's eyes just like pop out. He's like, oh, because all of a sudden this word queer was attached to something he genuinely values in the tradition, you know? So that's just, I really think this can help those kinds of conversations.
Thank you. We have another question, and Amy says, since Constantine, Christianity has been hijacked and weaponized by those in power to keep everyone in line. How do we still get the conversation going with those still holding a lot of power, economic, political, etc.? So many find it easier to just toe the party line, and those in power don't even recognize the need to converse as it threatens their power.
Yeah. You know, that's, thank you. That is such a good question. That is one of the most important questions confronting contemporary Christianity, I think, is that, and that's, I think that is not, I know, that is not just an issue for churches that lean to the right or conservative or what, I mean, it is not just about that. You're absolutely right to point back to Constantine. And the truth is that Christianity, as we know it, was formed in the cauldron of empire. And we continue to be an imperial church, whether we see that or not. And part of our work must be to pay close attention to when those imperial tendencies come up and begin to dismantle them. I'm going to give you one quick example right now. So I have had the great fortune to travel to the UK several times to go on speaking tours and stuff. I have deep affection for England, and of course the church. I'm an Episcopal priest, which means the Church of England is my, you know, my home church, right? So I brought home a prayer book, a church thing, a beautiful leather-bound morning and evening prayer. I love it so much. Well, the prayers right now that I'm saying for Epiphany are all about, from the rising of the sun to its setting, your name is proclaimed in all the world, you know? And this comes up over and over again, this idea that that Christian faith is being celebrated everywhere in the world, 24 hours a day. And you can just hear behind that, the sun never sets on the British Empire, you know? You just, like, I can't read it and not hear that and realize, my God, the price that so many people have paid,
Yep.
you know, by being colonized by that empire. So it just permeates our tradition, and even places where it might sound like really beautiful language, we've got to become aware of the imperialism that's embedded there.
Yeah, that's so true. I think about growing up and singing hymns like Onward Christian Soldier and all the very militant language, right? Conquering sort of every other thing. So that's a great question. We have another question, and it's around, and I had written this note earlier too, you know, often the word queer can be really charged, right? And so, you know, how would we approach making it less charged? Because obviously we know there's a negative history around it. And then often folks also, you know, want to be able to claim it and not sort of water it down and say, I'm gay, or, you know, whatever, like want to sort of use this and reclaim this thing. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is a charged word. And I think the challenge and the opportunity here is to charge it differently. You know, it must be charged. That's one of the reasons it's an important and valuable word, is because it makes you go like this, you know, I mean, and which is one of the reasons that, I want to hear more sermons in just kind of regular old churches where somebody is talking about the queerness of the tradition, because that word itself kind of shakes you up. Now, there's a social history, you know, of taking concepts that have been used to brutalize people and reclaiming them with a kind of pride. And every single Christian on this call right now knows about that, because that is exactly what we've done with the cross. Is you take a weapon of that is about torture and murder and shame, and you flip it around to say, no, this is about salvation. This is about liberation. This is where my hope resides. You know, and it is possible. It really is possible to do the same thing with the word queer. I will tell you that when I travel around and talk with people, it's actually happening less frequently, but particularly when the book first came out a few years ago, every single time I would talk, somebody would lift up the word queer and question it or challenge it or just express discomfort with it. And some of the most meaningful moments that I have had out on the road have been moments when, and this has happened more than once, when an older person will stand up, an older person who identifies as gay or trans or something, you know, stands up and says, when I was younger, I had that word spat at me, and I still carry the wounds from that. And I have never wanted to adopt that word in my life. And this is the first time I've ever heard it in a way that makes me think, okay, maybe I can approach this word.
Right.
Maybe there's healing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm getting a lot of amens. We do have one, probably our last question, and it's a really, really good one. And on what you just said, Liz, I think what I imagine folks who have shared that in the places that you have, reflected on your work and on this, queer theology is, and the reason why I think we and the, the affirming committees of both regions were compelled by this is this role reversal, right? Because it's not just that we are saying we want gay people to be allowed to come into our churches, right? It is, how can we actually recognize that queer people aren't a topic to be discussed, but we are the church?
Mhm.
And also, what can we learn from each other?
Mhm.
It's not just, the illusion of like providing a space, but it's also seeing the, like you beautifully say, the virtues. And I think that that's the next step for so many of us, is to move from, yes, we can be co-located and we can have a really flourishing ministry, but what does it look to go farther into our faith and say, what can we learn from this?
Mm.
Especially considering the fraught history and present that happens.
Yeah.
So the last question that we have for you tonight, Liz, is from Darren, who's on the Chinook Region Affirming Committee. And he says, in the same way, the word Christian is charged. The hard Christian right has used the term so much, it's hard for many of us progressives to use the term. How do we reclaim the word Christian in the midst of the Franklin Grahams of the world?
Yeah, Darren, thank you for that question too, because I think that's a problem. I think it's a challenge. I'm not gonna say it's a problem. I think it's a challenge, and I think we got a lot of work to do. There is part of me that kind of wishes we could just begin talking about a queer Christian movement. I mean, I really kind of wish we could just like. And the point that the person made before about misappropriation is an important one, because that's sort of complicated. But I think we need something like that is something sort of radical that gestures to a really different understanding of what Christianity is.
Yeah, it does sort of seem like that needs to be transformed as well.
Yeah.
And taken back in so many ways. Well, Liz, this has been really, really fantastic. And we so appreciate your work, the decades of experience that you bring to the table for us to learn from and to be among tonight. We want to let folks know that we have a great study book series, and Liz did go into the study guide for queer virtue and rewrote it, so it's very welcoming for online spaces. We want to make sure that everyone can utilize it safely and from whatever context that you're in. I also want to just have I introduced Tracy, who's the chair of Chinook Region Affirming Working Group. And I just want to have Reverend Bob Filia and Reverend Laura Hermikins say hi. If you can see them in the gallery, they are the co-chairs of the Pacific Mountain Region Affirming Working Group. And I've also pasted the names of the other folks that are in both groups in there, so you can see who's involved, all the different names that bring lots of great things to the table. I see that Chris is being awesome as usual and putting stuff into the chat. I invite you all, if you would like to, starting on February 22nd, we are starting the regional led series. So this will go through the study guide that Liz has written together on those 5 different topics of identity and pride, risk, coming out, touch, adoption and authenticity, scandal and hospitality. And I'm going to put in the chat as well those dates, and also the folks from the 2 committees who are leading them. I'll also put the registration in there, so feel free to register. If you feel like you want to lead these discussions on your own, avail yourself of the study guide. We want to make sure that you feel like you can customize it for the conversations in your specific community. If you want to just attend or invite your community to attend, because I've heard that Lent is a busy time for ministers and other people, and we just all have a lot of stuff going on, please feel free to do that too. I feel like this is going to be just a great time of connection and sharing, and we're very excited to have people from all different locations to be able to be in leadership and in attendance in these specific spaces. I think Chris is also putting some information in the chat about the recording from this evening. Now I'm going to put in here the nights when everything is. So that starts in about a week and a half from now. And I'll also copy and paste the registration form as well. This is completely free. This is something that the regions have invested in because we realize that these conversations really matter, that affirming is about futurity. It's about imagining a future that doesn't exist yet in order to live ourselves into that. And if there's ever a time where we need to imagine a new way for the church to be, I think the invitation is right here and right now. So I am so pleased that you shared this time with us. I'm so proud to be a part of this ministry. And you also get to, after those 5 sessions, so we're not done with Liz yet. Okay, Liz is stuck with us for a little while. I just want to mention one last thing. First of all, Liz is offering a one night only queer virtue for youth night. So we don't have the date set yet, but it's probably going to be on a Friday in March. So stay in tune. If you go on our registration link, you can click a box that says, let me know about the youth event. So you can go in there and you'll get all the details. So that will be really awesome. Our youth are incredibly important and they want to have interesting conversations and they have lots of stuff to say about this. So know that that is happening. And we thank Liz for her generosity around that. Also, we get Liz back. So on April 14th, she's going to come back and be with us and sort of say, okay, what next? We've had some conversations about this. How do we move forward? You know, someone said praxis. How do we put this into place? And so we will have a chance to hear from Liz and to ask questions and all that kind of stuff on April 14th. And you'll get all the information when you register. So thank you so much for coming tonight. Chris, is there anything I'm missing that you want to share?
Just that we will continue to promote the links for the study series as well as the closing session via regional e-news and our Facebook pages. So hopefully you can find the information there. I'll just add my thanks. This is what a great session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Liz, there's lots of thank yous and amens in the chat. Oh. And we know that it is what, 11 o'clock for you, 11 p.m.?
It's 11 o'clock. It's not, well, it's almost 11
in
o'clock.
New York?
Yeah.
What a treat it is to have you among us. And I'm looking at some of the names that are in here. And, you know, these are folks who have been trailblazers for me to have a space and a platform to be able to have conversations and to be out as queer. And so, you know, it's a huge gift and I'm always grateful. It's never lost on me that we are in a time when and a country where we can have these conversations when so many cannot. And so using that as inspiration to keep on and to continue. So yeah, that's all we have, folks. We're getting you out of here 2 minutes early tonight. And we really look forward to you joining in on any of the nights that we have upcoming. There's no obligation, but if you have a chance to read the book, we have all of the information on how to get the book in the registration package, so you don't have to worry about that. And hopefully we'll see you again in the next couple of months. So thanks so much, Liz.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes,
it's been great.
Get your
Thank
beautiful
you so
copy
much.
now.
Yay. Oh, bless your hearts. Good luck.
Take care, everybody.
See you in a few weeks.
Okay, bye-bye.